Norman wondered if he should be worried that there was this thing that he didn't know about in his drink. Then he took a sip and forgot all about it. Norman liked Diet Coke. Norman receives a Secret Santa gift. The holidays had snuck up on Norman, and he had forgotten that his company had an annual Secret Santa gift exchange. Of course, who he drew didn't matter. He always bought them a gift certificate to his favorite local bookstore. Who couldn't use more books, he reasoned. On the day of the gift exchange, he gave the gift certificate to Carl from IT, whom he had never met, but who seemed nice enough. Rather than staying for refreshments, he decided to call it an early night. He headed for the door when Lisa stopped him. "Norman, wait!" she exclaimed. "You never received your Secret Santa gift." She handed him a gift basket full of cat toys, catnip and a small scratching post, and fish-flavored treats, and even a photo frame for a picture of Norman and Norman. "You seem so fond of your cat," said Lisa. "When I drew your name, I thought maybe my gift for you should also be a gift for him, too." She gave his shoulder a squeeze. "Happy holidays, Norman." Norman tried to say thank you, but he couldn't speak. "Aw, Norman loves Norman more than he loves himself. Isn't that a beautiful thing?" And good for Lisa for being observant enough to know what Norman likes. I know what I like, and I like Norman. Norman walks home in the rain. It was 5 o'clock, finishing time for Norman. He had left his car at home today in an effort to start living a healthier lifestyle. Norman saw his coworker Lisa on the way out. Lisa tried to say goodbye, but Norman doesn't particularly like Lisa, so he continued on past her. As Norman walked out the exit, he noticed that it was raining. Norman doesn't want to ask Lisa for a lift, so he just headed home. Norman didn't make it home in time for CSI. It's okay to have bad days sometimes. "Oh, come on, Norman. Lisa bought you a gift for your cat and everything. I'm sure she'd be happy to give you a ride home. But oh well, squeaky wheel gets the grease, you know what I'm saying?" Norman and the girl at the bank. Norman was out the door 17 minutes early, as he was on most Tuesdays. This gave him enough time to go to the bank near the office to take out some money for the week and still arrive on time to work. Norman enjoyed this trip, as there was a very beautiful bank teller who always had a shift on Tuesday mornings. Norman went to the back of the line at the bank and pretended to look at pamphlets until her line was available. He requested the usual, $15 in cash. As the teller retrieved the money, she looked at Norman. "You know, I see you in here every Tuesday. You could take out more at once to save yourself the trip each week. Might make your life a bit easier," she said helpfully. Norman formed a weak smile and took his money. He never went to the bank on Tuesdays again. Oh, now here you cut me real deep. I don't know why you had to do this. "You have to go back to the bank, Norman. Please go back. Give her another chance." Norman finds a white hair. As Norman stroked Norman's soft fur, he was surprised to find a white hair in Norman's usually gray coat. "Well, Norman, it looks like someone isn't a spring chicken anymore," he said with a chuckle, and Norman mewed in response. Norman's reflection in the window caught his eye. He smiled. The sight of his bald head didn't bother him as much as usual today. That's right, feel secure in yourself, Norman and Norman. Getting old is just a part of life, and it can be the sweeter part of life. I guess it all depends on your frame of reference. Norman receives a text message. Norman was sitting on the recliner in his living room. He felt his cell phone buzz in his pocket. The vibrating sensation on his leg startled him. He retrieved his cell phone from his pocket and flipped it open. Norman had received a text message from Lisa. The message read, "Did you get that?" Norman's face became warm as a bead of sweat formed at the top of his brow. His armpits started to feel sticky. "Did I get what?" he thought. "Was I supposed to get something from Lisa? Did I miss it?" He hurriedly began crafting a response. "Was I supposed to get something from you?" Before completing the message, Norman deleted it because he worried it might come off as too abrasive. His thoughts flicked back and forth as he tried to come up with a proper response. His phone buzzed in his hand, and then it buzzed again. He had received 2 more text messages from Lisa. "Sorry, meant to send that to someone else. See you at work on Monday." A wave of relief crashed over Norman. He looked at the smiley face and smiled back at it. A few weeks later, Norman's cell phone bill arrived. He was happy that he had an unlimited messaging plan so that he didn't have to spend 30 cents on text messages that month. God. Yeah, that was back in the day, wasn't it? That unlimited text messaging plan is starting to pay for itself already. Oh, Norman, you're just precious. Norman tells a lie. As Norman entered his office, he was greeted by Barbara from HR. "Hi, Norman. How was your morning?" Norman thought about his morning. Today, he had already poured cereal in his bowl before he realized there was no milk left in the fridge. "It was fine, thank you," Norman said politely. He didn't know Barbara that well, and didn't feel like talking about his morning. "Well, that's a slippery slope to go down, Norman. You start with one lie, and before you know it, you're crawling through the back alley, checking out the love dumpster. All I'm saying, check yourself a little bit." I don't know that Barbara really wanted to hear about the cereal anyways. But it's cute that he thought she might. Norman makes a change. Norman sat while a commercial played during an old rerun of CSI. Norman idly clicked around on his cell phone. He accidentally worked his way into settings and found one that intrigued him. Change ringtone. He clicked on it and scrolled through its dizzying number of options. It'd be kind of fun to use a new ringtone, Norman thought to himself. Norman boldly selected the option labeled classical. Norman was almost too excited to sleep that night. 4 months later, Norman was driving home from work when he heard an unfamiliar noise from his pocket. Norman reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. Coming from it was a classical orchestra. Norman answered, and an automated voice told him that Norman had a veterinary appointment coming up soon. Norman changed his ringtone when he got home. 4 months is how long it took him to get a phone call? What's Norman's number? I'll sit on the phone with him, that's fine. I just want to make his days a little bit brighter. Norman smiled at a girl today, but she didn't notice. Oh man. Good on you for shooting your shot. It seems a bit bold for Norman, honestly. Norman gets nude in front of Lisa. Oh my. Norman got up from his desk and started walking toward the break room because he was feeling thirsty. He saw Lisa reading a book as he entered and went towards the vending machine to get a drink. After he inserted a crumpled up dollar, he pressed A1 to get a standard plastic water bottle. Norman reached down to grab his purchase, but in his hand he found a kiwi-flavored drink called Nude. He was confused as to why he didn't get a water bottle, but he decided to give the drink a try. Pretty delicious, honestly, but I know, knowing Norman, it is probably the one and only time that he tried it. That it was back to good old water, which is probably the way it's meant to be, isn't it? Norman is racially sensitive. Well, I should hope so. It was a bright, sunny day after work, and Norman decided that a walk in the park would be just the thing to cheer himself up and to work off that turkey sandwich he'd had for lunch. He even considered having some vanilla ice cream after dinner, if he walked far enough, but he decided that he should be healthy and save that treat for some other time. Midway through the walk, Norman noticed a bench and decided to take a break. He took a seat near the middle of the bench, set his briefcase down, and looked around to see if he could spot any birds. As he looked up, someone came and sat down on the other side of the bench. Norman imperceptibly scooted over to give that person more room, reasoning that it was a small bench, and both occupants would be more comfortable with more room. Norman glanced at the young black man next to him and then turned away. Suddenly the thought occurred to him that this man might interpret his movement as racist rather than just an attempt to be polite. Norman began to worry about this because he saw all people as equal regardless of color and didn't want this man to think less of him. Norman considers apologizing, but he was still unsure of what to say. An uncomfortable silence settled over the bench, and the unspoken implication of Norman's action hung between the two of them. Finally, Norman got up his courage to say something. "I like your tie," he blurted out. The man turned to look at him. "Thanks," he said. Norman felt better about their interaction and decided that now was the best time to escape this awkward situation. He got up and started to walk home. On the way out, Norman guiltily checked his pocket to make sure that his wallet was still there. Bro, what? Is this racially sensitive, or is this just like the episode where we find out how much white guilt Norman has? I understand. You're a neurotic mess, but about this, come on. Just be cool. And if you did a thing, then embrace it. You're like, yeah, that's fine, I said it. It's all part of living and learning, Norman. Treating people as equal human beings. Seeing them not for their skin color, but the content of their character. But I don't know. I'm glad your wallet was still there. Norman's first day of university. With sweat beaded on his 20-year-old brow, Norman hurried into an expansive lecture hall. He knew today would be the greatest day of his life. He clenched his textbook tightly as he found himself a desk, and he realized just how vast the hall was. Is this room gonna fill up? That's gotta be like 250 people, Norman thought to himself. There were several empty desks, yet the next girl to walk in sat right beside him. Norman didn't think much of it. He had a girlfriend already, his high school sweetheart. You don't know her. She goes to another school in Canada. The girl gave Norman a warm smile, which Norman coldly brushed off. This day was too important to try and make friends. He'd worked too hard to blow it all now. A little while later, when the lecture hall had already filled, an elderly professor burst through the door. He walked up to the table at the head of the hall and opened up his briefcase and removed some papers. He cleared his throat, and then he spoke. "You are all chosen to be here. You're the best and brightest from across the country, and have worked hard for your entire lives. And I'm proud to tell you all that this is the home stretch. This is the last hurdle before your future, and let me tell you, your future is bright." Norman smiled from ear to ear. He had turned down countless parties in high school, pushed away all of his friends just to study and get to this point. Even his relationship with his girlfriend was failing, as he loved her a lot, but he didn't want her to stand in his way. The professor started his lecture, and Norman was completely enthralled. He hung on his every word, and after a nearly 3-hour lecture, Norman couldn't wait for the next class. He headed home on the bus, excited to tell his girlfriend about the day. As he walked to the front door of the small house that they rented together, she was waiting on the porch. As he approached, he could see she had a strange look on her face. "Norman, I've got to tell you something." He could feel his heart beating faster and faster as he followed her into the house. He sat down in his favorite chair and tossed his textbook on the coffee table as she sat on the couch. Their eyes met, and the next few words would change both of their lives completely. However, Norman just blanked them out. He didn't hear them, and when his girlfriend burst into tears, he wasn't sure what the problem was. "Sorry, what'd you say?" Norman stumbled over his words as he struggled to comfort her. "Norman, I'm pregnant. Didn't you hear me?" Norman let these words settle in. His initial reaction was actually somewhat excited. He'd always dreamed of having a child, but as his excitement set in, he began to sink in his seat. The slow realization of all the sacrifices that he would have to make rushed through his head. She struggled to keep a part-time job. He would be the sole provider, and likely he'd have to quit school. "I don't want you to have to quit school," she blurted out, seemingly reading Norman's mind. "I think we should talk about giving it up." No, Norman would not have any of that. He made this child, and even if it was a mistake, they would go through with it. Norman had a very traditional sense to him, and he knew what he had to do next. "I'll call the university tomorrow and drop out of my classes. My uncle works in an office. I'll see if I can't find some work with him." Norman's cool and collected reaction put a smile on his girlfriend's face. "We should get married, I think." She smiled at him and rested her head on his lap. He knew that his life was about to change. Norman thought about what his teacher had said about his bright future, and briefly thought that this would mess all of that up. Suddenly, the thought of being a father and a husband dawned upon him, and Norman was content. 20 years later, Norman was sitting in his favorite chair, the same chair that he sat in when he found out that he was to be a father. He heard a bang over by his bookshelf and saw Norman dash into another room. Norman slowly walked up and saw that a book had fallen off the shelf. As he approached it, he realized that it was the textbook from his first and only day of university. Norman read the title out loud. Forensic Science for Beginners. He had a huge smile on his face. He placed the book back on the shelf and walked back to his chair, ignoring any sort of thoughts of what could have been. That's beautiful. He's satisfied with his path in life, and I think that's like one of the first and only things that most people aspire to, isn't it? Yeah, he works a crappy office job, but he's proud to be a husband and father, even if he is slightly estranged from his kids. There is a sequel to this story, which we're going to check out right now. Norman Tells His Parents. Norman Origins 2. This post is a follow-up to another story I wrote. You should be able to read this one on its own, but it definitely benefits from reading the other story, which we did. Norman was always closer to his father. He had a very relaxed, friendly personality, not unlike Norman himself, and he found it both welcoming and reassuring. Norman didn't dislike his mother by any means. She was a small lady who was often assertive, and he just always gravitated towards his father. As Norman drove up in his used station wagon that he bought with his tuition refund, he went over what he needed to say. It had been nearly 6 months since he had found out about the pregnancy. He thought perhaps he'd waited too long to tell his parents and was nervous about their reaction, specifically his mother's. He had wished his girlfriend, now fiancée, had joined him, but she wasn't feeling too well. Norman walked down the familiar pathway through the yard. He climbed the steep stairs and let himself in. His parents were watching the news, and both of them stood up when Norman entered for a hug. He hugged them both and told them to sit back down. Norman began the story about the pregnancy, having to quit school, the decision to get married. His parents always let Norman finish talking before saying anything. They stared at Norman somewhat blankly. Norman finished the story by placing an invitation to his wedding on their coffee table. "Norman, we love you no matter what," his mother spoke first. Norman's father sat back a little in his seat and scratched his beard, as he always did before he said something important. "We do love you, Norman, but we can't support this." Norman's mother almost looked as shocked as Norman himself. "I can't support a child out of wedlock, and I can't support you giving up school." Norman stared blankly at his father. He never talked back to his parents, not even as a child. "Well, Pop, it is extremely important to me to get married before the child is born," Norman began as respectfully as he could. "And maybe after the birth I could go back." "We will not support this child, and we will not support you in this," Norman's father spoke in a stern tone that Norman had never heard before. This was extremely unlike Norman's father, but like Norman himself, he did have a very traditional sense. Norman looked to his mother for support. Surely she would stand up for him, be his savior. She looked like she disagreed with Norman's father, but never said a word against him. She placed her hands on her husband's hands and supported his decision. Norman didn't understand, but he would have to respect his parents' decision. He walked towards the door, and when he exited, he heard it lock behind him, something that had never happened in any previous visit. He knew what this meant, and defeated, he returned to his car. About a month later, Norman was sitting comfortably in his favorite chair, sorting through the mail. He received a return RSVP to his wedding, and began opening it. Instantly, he recognized it was from his parents, and they had checked off the box, "Respectfully decline." Oof. It didn't matter much, as the wedding would have to be postponed because Norman's fiancée went into labor the morning of the wedding. It was a little bit early, but the baby was delivered successfully, and it was a boy. Meet Norman Jr. As Norman held his son in his arms for the first time, he was overcome with emotion. It It was a truly beautiful thing that he had helped create. It was someone that he would love and cherish and be proud of and support, all unconditionally. Norman wondered if his own father felt the same feeling when Norman was born. Damn, dude. Why do Norman stories always dig so deep? Sometimes that's the most difficult cringe of all, isn't it? It's like, this is far too real. It's making me uncomfortable. Yes, I want to be the best father that I can for my sons. I don't know how great a job I'm doing of that sometimes, but all you can do is the best that you can do. Norman wins the lottery. Norman had won the lottery. The winning ticket was prominently displayed on his refrigerator, held in place by a magnet in the shape of an ice cream cone. Norman didn't care for that particular magnet, which was why he had selected it for the task of holding his ticket in place. Better to give the other, better-liked magnets the task of holding on to more permanent items. Such a Norman way of thinking, I love it. Monday morning came, and Norman rose an hour earlier than usual. He disliked deviating from his routine, but these were special circumstances. After taking care to sign his name on the back of the ticket, seal it in an envelope for safekeeping, and then hide it away inside his coat's inside pocket, Norman made his way to the lottery office. He'd been thinking all weekend about how to spend his winnings, and now that they were so close at hand, he could scarcely contain his excitement. The woman behind the counter gave Norman a strange look, but she counted out his $3 all the same. That afternoon, Norman ordered a cookie and a pickle with his lunch. Yeah, why not? Small wins, we take those. Good for you, Norman. Look at him, he's not disappointed by the amount or anything. He's content with what he's got. As I say every time we visit this place, I think we could all strive to be a bit more like Norman. Norman orders a small cheese pizza. Norman was hungry, but Norman was not in the mood to cook his own dinner. He pondered on this for a few minutes before he decided on ordering a pizza. The phone rang 3 times before it was answered by a girl with a very pleasant voice. Her voice continued to be pleasant as she informed Norman that he needed to order more than just a small cheese pizza to meet the minimum delivery. Norman was thoughtful. He rarely ordered in, so he hadn't expected this conundrum. The girl with the pleasant voice suggested that he get some chicken wings, and because Norman had already thrown caution to the wind by ordering a pizza in the first place, he thought he might as well go all out and get a 5-pack. When Norman's order arrived, he was met with yet another puzzler. His 5 pairs of chicken wings did not contain 5 wings. "Yes, there's been a mistake with my order," he explained. "No, there weren't 5 pieces." With a promise to fix the situation, the girl with the pleasant voice was gone before Norman could ask her what he should do about the extra chicken wing. Within 20 minutes, there was a knock at the door. The delivery boy from before was back with a fresh 5-pack of chicken wings, free of charge. He was also gone before Norman could ask him what he was supposed to do with this extra chicken wing. Norman was now left with a small cheese pizza and a total of 11 chicken wings. If this wasn't a whirlwind of a night, Norman didn't know what was. He's just living his best life. You deserve it, Norman. Honestly, share those wings with Norman and just enjoy yourself. These are the good times, I tell you what. Norman's special evening. Norman was particularly excited for CSI tonight. The episode due to come in the usual rotation of reruns was one that he had never seen before. It was the only episode that he had never managed to catch. Something had always come up. Last time it was a vet appointment for Norman. As he settled into his chair and the intro played, there was a knock at his door. He got up and answered it, and standing there were 2 very well-dressed young men from the Church of Latter-day Saints. They started talking about religion. Norman was not particularly interested, and he was a little anxious to be missing his show. However, he didn't want to be rude to the very polite young men, so he smiled, nodded, and made polite small talk for 45 minutes, until the young men left of their own accord. Norman went back to his chair, but the episode was almost over. He turned the TV off. Maybe next time. Why you not, like, catching this on TiVo? I guess that's, like, an old people thing. Now it's just a DVR, right? But all I'm saying, Norman, is invest in yourself. Although maybe he likes the thrill of the chase, you know? He's like, that's that one episode that I've never seen. Norman is pranked. Norman was sitting in his recliner when the phone rang late in the evening. Hello, Norman asked harshly. He hadn't meant for his hello to sound so aggressive, but thought that the thrilling action scene playing on the television might have affected it. He was already worried that this call with whoever it might be would turn sour based on the rude beginning. Hello? The voice said back. Her voice sounded so much less offensive than his, and he was glad for that. But who was she? She sounded young, like a little girl, Norman thought. Hello, Norman responded. This time he was careful not to make it sound so harsh, but at the same time tossed the ball back into her court, as she was the one who had called. Is your refrigerator running? She asked. Norman pondered this question, unsure of the answer. He stood from the chair, carefully tossed the blanket resting on top of him to the armrest, and went to his refrigerator. He opened it, looking around. Did the light mean that it was working properly? Does the light mean it's working properly? Is it running? Maybe. Does the light mean that it's working properly? She hung up quickly, the phone clanging on plastic before cutting out. Norman was confused. He looked online to see if the light meant that the refrigerator was okay. It gave him various answers. Norman would have to call the apartment's maintenance in the morning. Is your refrigerator running? You better go catch it! Honestly, good attempt. It's an oldie but a goodie, just a classic. But Norman is a bit too analytical. You can try him again, though. If he doesn't have a DVR, he definitely doesn't have caller ID, right? Let's try one more story, and then I'm going to get out of here for today. Nomran. Norman excitedly filled out a form he had received from the office administrator. Everyone was receiving a complimentary nameplate to hang outside of their cubicle, to make it easier for people who didn't work at the company to find a specific person in the office. Norman carefully considered the color options. A dark forest green or a light tan color. Norman decided to go with the more traditional option of green and went to turn in the form. Next week, Norman checked the mailroom and was pleased to find that his nameplate had arrived. He decided to wait until lunch to put it up, as he didn't want to waste company time on his own personal pride. At lunch, Norman carefully unwrapped his nameplate to find a tan nameplate with Nomran written in white text. Norman frowned. At least they got most of it right, Norman thought to himself as he hung it outside of his cubicle. At the end of the day, as Norman was shutting off his computer, he heard a voice outside his cubicle. Have a nice day, Nomran, Lisa said with a wink as she walked by. Norman smiled as he drove home. Oh man, Norman and Lisa have this real will they, won't they type of thing going on, don't they? Nobody could seem to decide, and I guess it's better that way. r/LifeOfNorman, oh, how I've missed you. Norman loses his balance. After watching the credits to CSI, as Norman always does, he turned off the TV and headed to bed. As he was ascending the stairs, Norman realized he was thirsty. I'm already halfway up the stairs, Norman thought. Am I thirsty enough to warrant going back down? Whilst in the midst of this perplexing dilemma, Norman had become distracted and didn't realize that the stairs had ended. He put his foot down on what he was expecting to be the top step, but instead found nothing and lost his balance. Norman was filled with terror as he found himself falling, but he corrected his balance by catching the wall with his left hand. His heart still pounding from his near-death experience, Norman had a hard time falling asleep, but at least he was no longer thirsty. Yes, Norman discovers Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Always go back down. You're gonna be thirsty in the morning. Get yourself a drink, Norman. You deserve it. Norman avoids an awkward situation. During his lunch break, Norman was using the restroom. He always made sure to only go to the bathroom on break, so he wouldn't waste any of the company's time. Suddenly, the door opened. A pair of feet appeared and began to walk towards the stall that Norman was currently occupying. Norman froze. What if the owner of those feet tried his stall door? He would have to say, occupied, and Norman always felt uncomfortable talking to someone whilst he was squatting on a toilet. Thinking quickly, Norman forced himself to cough. The noise echoed through the small room, the feet paused, and then turned on a new path. Norman heard the door of the stall next to his open and shut. Crisis averted. His heartbeat slowing, Norman set about finishing his business. Has his heart been beating since last night, Norman? You might want to have that looked at. And the situation really is only as awkward as you let it be. You know, that stranger could turn into your pooping buddy if you just open the door and allow them to make a human connection. Come on, Norman. I know you can do it. Norman buys a treat for Norman. It was Sunday, the usual day for Norman to go grocery shopping. He carefully went down his list, checking off each item as he put them into his cart. Next item on his list was some food for Norman. He walked over to the pet food aisle and found the usual bag of food that Norman liked. Right next to the food were cat treats. Norman didn't usually like to stray from his list, but Norman had been such a nice cat over the years that Norman decided that he would show a little appreciation to Norman. Norman spotted a small bag of treats made by the same brand that made Norman's food. He decided on that, but with a tuna flavor. Norman felt a bit giddy as he placed the cart into the bag. He was happy to get a little treat for his friend, and he hoped he liked it. When Norman got home, he unpacked his groceries and then opened the bag of treats. He grabbed one from the top of the bag and gave it to Norman. Norman sniffed it for a few seconds, then grabbed it from Norman's fingers and happily ate it. Aw, I do love the Norman bouncing back and forth and you're trying to figure out which Norman's the actual Norman and which is the cat Norman. Bless up to both of the Normans, that's what I say. Norman's nickname. Norman was sitting in his cubicle and realized that he was thirsty. Bro, you always dehydrated. What's happening here? He decided to get a drink of water from the cooler. I'll be quick. He wasn't paid for strutting around the office all day, after all. Setting off down the corridor, he noticed Dennis walking towards him. Dennis worked in sales, or maybe marketing. He was a big, burly man, always cheerful, but a bit too forward for Norman's taste. Hey, Norm, how's it going, buddy? Dennis bellowed from the other end of the corridor, a big grin on his face. Norm? Norman didn't care for that nickname, not one bit. Dennis was the only one using it too, which somehow made it worse. This time, I'm gonna tell him, Norman thought to himself. My name is Norman. Please be so kind as to call me by my name. It was a bit harsh, Norman admitted, but he wanted to make his point very clear. He really didn't care for that nickname. My name is Norman. He rehearsed what he was gonna say in his mind. Dennis was now 15 feet away. My name is Norman. 10 feet. My name is Norman. 6 feet. My name is Norman. 3 feet. Hello, Dennis, Norman said as they passed each other. So you know exactly how it's gonna end, but the build-up is like a big maybe moment. Maybe he will take the power. Oh, he's not gonna do it. Why do you not ever do it? He's just Norman, I guess. Oh my god, Norman gets Pokemon Go. That's exciting. Norman had been hearing all this news about Pokemon Go and decided to download the app on his new smartphone. He remembered Norman Jr. used to be obsessed with Pokemon in his younger years, and now that it was making a comeback, he decided to see what all the fuss was about. He created his character, naming it Norman 1970 because Norman was already taken. Boy, there sure are a lot of Normans in the world, he said to Norman, scratching him behind the ears. He chose his monster. He thought the blue little turtle looked cute. Oh my god. Norman is a Blastoise, Chad. I'm so proud of you. Now what? Norman thought to himself. Nothing was happening. He thought maybe Norman Jr. would know. He texted him. Hi, Norman. I just got that new Pokemon app. Have you got it yet? Almost immediately, he received a reply. Excitedly, Norman checked his phone. Hey, Dad. Yeah, it's great. And it's Pokemon. Confused by that last sentence, but ignoring it, Norman replied, Yeah, it is fun. Is there a way for me to be friends with you on it? No, not yet. I guess this was posted 7 years ago. That's true. Disappointed, Norman replied, okay, well, have fun. And don't forget to turn on Words with Friends. Oh God, you're tearing my heart out. I play like 2 games of Words with Friends against my grandma and she crushes me and then I quit. She's the only person that I really want to play and connect with, but she just beats me so bad my ego can't handle it. Anyways, that part cut me deep, man. Norman didn't receive a reply. Well, he must be busy playing that new Pokemon game, thought Norman. He opened up the app again, but still didn't understand what to do, and couldn't find any instructions. Sighing, Norman laid down his phone and turned on an old episode of CSI. About 30 minutes in, his phone buzzed with a notification that Norman Jr. had played a word. I'm gonna reinstall Words with Friends tonight. Anyway, moving on. Norman can't get comfortable. I mean, he's not comfortable in his own skin. Norman lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He couldn't get comfortable. His neck felt like it wasn't quite at the right angle, no matter which way he turned. He didn't want to have a stiff neck in the morning. His room was quite warm. Not warm enough to make him take off his check pajama shorts, but warm enough for him to mildly consider opening the window slightly. Norman was scared of being burgled. He dare not open the window. Norman turned over and thought about tomorrow's workday. The alarm rang and he jolted awake. His neck hurt. Are you somehow surprised by this, Norman? This is what happens when we start getting on in years, you know? At this point, it's just a fact of life and we gotta deal with it. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Norman breaks down. Norman was driving to his relatives when his car broke down. Oh, I thought he was having like a psychotic break. That's good. I'm glad it's just the car, Norman. Norman had seen that check engine light was on, but he had mistaken it for the change oil light. You're not very good at cars, are you, Norman? Norman was very distraught, but was very glad that he paid his auto insurance. He called them up and explained the situation, and they told him to expect a tow within the hour. Norman turned on the emergency lights in his car, and then called up his relatives to explain that he would be a little late. To pass the time, he took a Sudoku book out of his glove compartment and waited for the tow truck. After solving about 3 puzzles, the tow truck arrived and took his car to the nearest garage. When Norman got there, he realized he was pretty close to his relative's house and simply walked the rest of the way. Well, hey, sometimes things work out, don't they? Everything's gonna be just fine until that bill shows up. And then I don't know, good luck. Norman chats with his son. It was a Wednesday evening, and Norman had just sat down to watch some CSI when he heard his phone beep. His heart started to race. See, there goes Norman's heart again. Get it checked out, man. When he saw that it was a text message from Norman Jr. He hadn't heard from his son in a while, but Norman figured it was because Norman Jr. was very busy now that he was attending college. Norman flipped open his phone and read the message. It said, "I'm doing pretty good. How about you?" Norman was perplexed, but then his phone let out a second beep. Oops, sorry, texted the wrong person. Norman texted back, "That's okay, son." He made sure to double check his spelling and then he pressed send. Norman sat back in the seat and felt warm all over. He was glad that Norman Jr. was doing well. That's one thing I love about Norman. He doesn't really begrudge anybody for the things that they do. They go about their lives, he goes about his. Everybody's happy. There's no expectation, so there's no disappointment. It's really big brain time if you think about it. Norman gets drunk. Oh, there's so unlike you. It was early evening as Norman sat, pen in his hand, eyes fixed upon his newspaper, wrapping up the last few puzzles in his crossword. He took a sip from his glass of iced water as he pondered the possibilities for the final solution. Norman read the hint again. 23 across. Intoxicated. He thought for a moment as he glanced at Norman sitting on his lap. With a smirk of satisfaction, Norman penciled in the letters D-R-U-N and K to finish the crossword. Quite pleased with his answer, he took another sip of water. See, you're taking care of that thirst problem that you was having. I'm glad Norman's not a drinker. It makes me like him more. Although if he did get wasted, he probably would really cut loose, but you don't want to see that. Norman goes to Starbucks. Oh, the caffeine? Yeah, he's getting real amped up. It's a slippery slope, Norman. Slippery slope. Norman woke up to the blaring of his alarm clock. Norman felt particularly poorly rested, as he had stayed up an extra hour the previous night watching CSI. He showered, dressed, brushed his teeth, and went to the kitchen to make some coffee. Norman carefully placed a filter in the single-cup coffee maker, measured out precisely 2 scoops of coffee, and turned it on. And nothing. Norman came to the sinking realization that the coffee maker was broken. Norman felt the edge of a caffeine headache coming on and decided that he would buy coffee on the way to work. Soon after, Norman pulled into the parking lot of the local Starbucks. He walked into the shop and stood there for several minutes, attempting to make sense of the menu. Feeling rather awkward, Norman just left and made himself a cup of coffee at the office. And it's free. That's what it's really all about. I'm not paying $3-4 for a black coffee. You missed me with that. I know Norman doesn't register the feel-good fancy feeling of walking around being like, look, I got Starbucks, you guys. Which I think is like a lot of the reason that people go. Whatever. We'll get on into the next story, see what happens. Norman is happy. Oh, I love it. Norman was sitting outside when he had the idea of walking a bit. He didn't want to waste the whole day indoors, so he went outside and felt the sun shining on this cold winter day. There was no sound, except songs sung by the birds. That moment, he finally felt at peace. Norman was happy. After a few minutes, Norman walked home. When he arrived, he found his owner, Norman, laying on the couch, watching TV. They got me again. He would probably never experience the happiness that Norman had felt that day. Who's happier than a cat? You answer me that. Heh, that rhymes. Norman is famous. It was a quiet Thursday night. Norman, with Norman peacefully curled up in his lap, was watching a CSI rerun that he had only seen once or twice before as he wound down from his long day. As he sat quietly in the darkening living room, Norman's thoughts began to wander. He thought of his coworker Lisa and the brownies that she was bringing into the office the next morning. He thought of earlier in the day when he had misspelled a word in an email to his boss and consequently thought he was going to be fired for it. He thought of Norman, asleep in his lap, and how easy the life of a house cat must be. When he heard it, somebody said his name. His mind immediately came back to attention. He swore he had heard it, and he was right.
Officer Norman, I have a piece of information you'd like to hear.
Norman smiled. How nice it is of them to include my name. Shortly thereafter, the episode ended, and Norman made his way to bed. He dreamed of being the Officer Norman portrayed in the show, and he smiled in his sleep. Norman, is your boss you think you're going to be fired over a misspelled word in an email? That's probably the most concerning thing of all. And you could be a CSI police guy if you wanted. Although the first time somebody shoots at Norman, I think he's probably going to rethink every choice he ever made. Norman gets kissed. Norman was in the checkout line of the grocery store. The woman in front of him had just finished paying and started to leave. As the cashier started to ring Norman up, he realized that the woman left behind her wallet. Quickly, he retrieved her wallet and called after her. His heart pounding, the woman turned around and headed back to him. "Thank you so much," she exclaimed. "I don't know what I would have done." Before Norman could say anything, she gave him a quick kiss and was on her way. Norman blushed as he awoke to the sound of his alarm clock. "Norman, I just had the most unusual and exciting dream," he proudly told his best friend. Norman started his day in a better mood than usual. "Nah, man, wrap it up, go to sleep. Let's find the dream girl again. She kissed me."
She want me. She want me. She want me.
I couldn't title these stories. I'd name it something weird. Be like, Norman gets morning wood. Let's not do that. Anyways, moving on. Norman gets a call. Norman had been catching up on CSI when he heard his phone ring. Wondering who it could be, he fished it out from between the couch cushions, and his son's number was on the caller ID. It had been a while since his son had just called him out of the blue. He paused his current episode and picked up the phone. "Hey, son, how's it going?" Norman answered cheerfully. "Oh, hey, Dad. I meant to call Dan. My bad," replied his son, hanging up the phone without even waiting for a reply. Norman turned back to the TV and resumed his episode of CSI. "It's okay, Norman. Just breathe. You're gonna get through this." At a certain point, Norman Jr. is gonna realize that you really do need to bond with your parents, but right now, he's separating. He's just left the nest. It's gonna be okay, or so we tell ourselves. Norman shouts at Lisa. Oh my god, I thought they had a will they won't they thing going on. I guess the answer is they won't. Norman instantly regretted the email after he had sent it. Earlier that morning, Lisa had said to Norman that he had to change his password because it was getting too old. Norman had not considered it before. He only had one password, and it worked for all of his accounts. Which brings us to today's sponsor, not... He logged in and was prompted to enter a password of at least 6 characters. He typed, Norman. Seems secure. The computer replied, "This password has been used previously. Please enter a new password." "Of course," Norman whispered under his breath. He typed, Norman with a capital N. The computer responded, "Your password should include at least one uppercase character and one numeric character." Norman typed, in all caps, N0RMAN. Norman had substituted the letter O with the numeral 0. He was quite pleased with his ingenuity. Delightfully devilish Norman. Though he did worry that he might forget his new password, so he wrote it on a post-it and stuck it to his monitor. As soon as his account opened, Norman went directly to his email and said, "Hi, Lisa, that wasn't nearly as hard as expected!" A chill shot through his spine. He quickly followed up with, "I'm sorry, Lisa. I didn't mean to shout. I accidentally left the caps lock on." How does one man contain all this nervous energy? Norman hoped he wasn't too late. An email pinged back from Lisa. It seemed to be an emoticon of some sort. Norman had seen one of these before. He realigned his eyes vertically and saw a face with a tongue sticking out. He knew it was meant jokingly, but he couldn't help but note if it weren't for the tongue sticking out, then the emoticon's mouth would not be a smile, but a flat line. He would make sure to apologize to Lisa in person. I'm proud of Norman for not being terminally online, but how do you deal with all these things? This is why he has heart problems. You realize that, right? Just take a big old chill pill, Norman. If you want, I could sell you some lewds, man. But yeah, I guess the nervous energy is what makes him relatable. Anyways. Norman does the laundry. It was Sunday morning, which meant it was time for Norman to do laundry. He separated his clothes into lights and darks. It's important to wash them separately, Norman thought to himself. He wasn't sure why, though. Norman picked up the laundry basket full of light clothes and started toward the machine, only to notice that Norman was sleeping on top. I'll do the darks first. Might as well let Norman rest a little while longer. After Norman set down the basket of light clothes, carefully so as not to wake up Norman, and he put his darks into the washing machine, he sat down to watch an episode of CSI. When it was done, he noticed that the washing machine wasn't making any noise. Time to start my lights. Norman liked washing his light clothes more. When he got to the washing machine to take his dark clothes out, however, Norman noticed that he had forgotten to even start it earlier. Oh, heavens, Norman thought. I can be so forgetful. Norman started the machine and sat down for another episode of CSI. Are you sure that your brain is not tricking you because you like CSI so much that you just supposedly forgot to start it? Probably because you were so excited to watch CSI. It's all he has in this life. Let him have it. Also, I'm amazed that you can do all your laundry on one day. I guess if you're just one person, that works. But we got a big family now. The laundry's just, it's always never ending. Norman and Lisa feel a spark. Oh, here they go again. Back to the will they, won't they? Norman was working so hard, he hadn't realized how uncomfortably warm he had become. Must be like 75, 76 degrees in here, Norman thought. as he rocked back and forth to remove his woolly sweater vest. His shirt became untucked for a moment as he extended his arms over his head. Just then, Lisa peeked into his cubicle. She pretended that she hadn't just seen Norman's pale stomach, as she smiled and quietly gestured for Norman's attention. "Oh, hi, Lisa," Norman said, with an embarrassed grin as he pulled his shirt back down. "Hi, Norman. Say, do you have some liquid paper I could use?" Norman thought in silence for a moment. "I think so." He checked the drawer. Lisa came closer. "I made a mistake on my report," she explained. Norman chuckled knowingly and continued to look. "Here it is," Norman said with excitement. He felt very useful. Such a human experience. He wheeled his chair towards Lisa and handed it to her. Just then, a shock jumped from his finger to Lisa's wrist, and they both jumped a little. "Ouch," Lisa said, somewhat playfully. "Well, thanks for the liquid paper. I'll bring it back soon." I'm not sure why that happens," said Norman with a laugh, but Lisa was already gone, and she never did return the liquid paper. Bro, she went into the bathroom and sniffed it. That's what Lisa is. She's a glue sniffer. I don't know if you could get high off liquid paper. But you know that Lisa, anything to catch a buzz. She's bad news, Norman. I don't want to see you creating any more sparks with that girl, all right? Norman accidentally goes to the bathroom. In his pants! No, just kidding. It was the middle of the afternoon, and Norman got up from his desk to go make some copies. After walking for a minute, he suddenly realized that he had absent-mindedly turned down the hall towards the bathroom instead of the one towards the copy room. There were other people walking around the office, and Norman didn't want to look foolish by just turning around in the middle of the hallway. Who hasn't been there? You're just so human, Norman. What a precious little guy. Instead, Norman just kept walking and walked right into the bathroom. There were also other people in the bathroom, so Norman walked to the sink and rinsed his hands for a second so that it would look like he had had a reason for coming in. Then he left the bathroom and headed to the copy room. As he made his copies, Norman thought to himself that he'd have to pay more attention to where he was walking next time. I just love Norman, always getting up to his Norman shenanigans. Will he never learn? I guess we'll find out, won't we? Norman can't decide. Cheddar or mozzarella? Norman was in the grocery store, deciding on cheese for his dinner. A woman next to him must have noticed that he was unsure. "I really like brie," she said to Norman. Norman thought it was rude to ignore the stranger and picked up the brie. "Thanks," he said as he walked away. Norman doesn't really like brie. I think she was trying to put the moves on you, Norman. I don't know that this was actually about the cheese. And I don't actually know that cheddar versus mozzarella is even a debate. You like the sharp taste of cheddar? I can't fix you. Go for the chewy taste of mozzarella. I guess chewy isn't really a taste, but it doesn't need a taste. That's how good the mouthfeel is. I know which hill I'm dying on. Norman had to use the bathroom at work. Again, bro? You're gonna need to get your kidneys checked out too. Norman had to use the bathroom at work. As he entered, a man he didn't recognize was exiting. "Sorry," Norman said, as the man slipped past and Norman stood holding the door. He wasn't sure why he apologized. I need to stop doing that, Norman thought. He wouldn't. Just apologize to everybody. That way you won't offend nobody. There will be no conflict. Unless there's conflict over why you apologize so much. You just can't win in these days and times. Norman stays up late. Norman looked at the clock. 8:58. 2 minutes until bedtime. He walked to his pillbox and picked out his melatonin tablet. He walked to the sink to fill up his glass and thought about a conversation that he had overheard that day at work. His new coworker Jeff had walked out a minute before 5 and yelled, "TGIF, party demon, whoa!" Norman had never really been especially excited about Fridays, since it usually just meant 2 days of trying to fill time with puzzles and Norman's walks. but he decided to embrace Jeff's enthusiasm. He placed the melatonin back in Friday's compartment and drank his water quickly, tossing his head back as he finished. He set the glass down loudly on the counter, pulled out the new Extreme Sudoku book that he had gotten at last year's Office Secret Santa, and began working on a puzzle. Not just any puzzle either. Norman flipped to the last puzzle and began filling in the boxes. In pen! TGIF indeed. Oh yeah, ride the lightning, Norman! Look at him go! He's getting too wild for me. Honestly, you're making me uncomfortable. You're sort of going off the rails, Norman. Do we need to have an intervention? This could be the start of something very dark. Norman's lucky day. Oh, we get lucky. Today, Norman was feeling very special. In his newspaper, Norman came across the horoscope section. Curious as to what it would say, Norman searched in his mind for his birthday and found his zodiac. Cancer, he muttered as he saw the name of his zodiac. Initially, Norman was scared of this name, but then he saw the prediction of how his day would be filled with luck. Done reading this, he already felt much more luckier. Yeah, that's double plus good. It's much more luckier. Also, I don't know anything about Cancer as a zodiac sign, so maybe the comments could enlighten me there. Thanks so much. Hey, also, if you watch this far in the video, maybe you're enjoying it, maybe you should subscribe, because we do stuff like this a lot. Thank you so much. Anyways, once Norman arrived at work, he saw that the perfect parking spot that had been reserved for him was still untaken. Huh. Happily, Norman parked his car, then pulled out his briefcase and went into the office. First, though, he made a stop at the break room. Norman usually gets his traditional brew of coffee before beginning his work. Today, though, when he went in, on the table was a box of donuts with a sign saying, "Take one." Inside was the last sprinkled chocolate donut, Norman's childhood favorite. He took his steaming mug of coffee and the donut and bit into it contentedly. After work, he went home to make dinner for himself and Norman. He reached his hand into the fridge to take the unopened 5-pack of bacon. When he opened it, he found an extra slice, and a small grin formed on his face. Tonight, he'd have his grilled cheese and bacon sandwich, and he could have an extra slice of bacon while enjoying the season finale of CSI. For Norman, there really was nothing more that he could wish for today. I'm glad Norman out there doing a thing, getting lucky and whatnot, but I hope this doesn't turn him into an astrology guy. Norman will be like, "Oh, you're such a Sagittarius." Yeah, sorta. What does that mean? Nobody knows. That's why you can just say it. Anyways. Norman reads an email. As Norman sat at his desk reading an email from his boss, he propped his arm up on the desk and rested his cheek on his fist. The skin on the side of his face bunched up, and Norman observed that he could now see slightly less out of his left eye. Norman lowered his arm and straightened his posture. "What is this, Norman? Seems to me like you're burning up good company time, doesn't it?" I'm sure Norman did feel some level of guilt about it later on. He won't even poop while he's on the clock, for God's sake. Anyways, one more, and then we wrap it for the day. Norman doesn't win Employee of the Month. Oh, come on. He really deserves... I just said he doesn't poop on company time. He deserves it more than any of us. Norman was excited. It was the second Wednesday of the month, and that meant that the Employee of the Month would be announced. Not only did they get their name put under a plaque reading Outstanding Employee, they would also receive a bonus to their paycheck. Oh, that's the part that's really important. Sign me up. Norman really wanted that bonus so he could save up for his trip to the Arizona Mining and Mineral Museum even faster.
They're rocks, Hank.
No, they're minerals. Jesus, Maria.
Norman continued filing reports while watching the slot closely, waiting to see who the new winner would be. He saw the boss's door open and sat with bated breath while the boss made a show of changing the nameplate. As the boss finished changing it and went back into his office, Norman got up to look at the new Employee of the Month. As Norman approached the plaque, he was able to see the name displayed more clearly than from his desk. He was confused. The nameplate read Jason Goldberg. Norman recognized that name. Jason was the second best worker in the office after Norman, who had been the employee of the month for 3 months running. But, I mean, it was very clear who the better worker was. Bro, why is Norman hoarding all of these bonuses? Let Jason have a chance, all right? You had it for 3 months. It's time for a shift. Norman quickly went into the boss's office and knocked politely on the door and waited for permission to enter, sure that it was a mistake and that the boss would rectify this as soon as he was notified. Upon entering the office, the boss emitted a heavy sigh.
I knew this was coming,
he muttered to himself.
Please take a seat, Norman,
the boss said. After Norman sat, he continued.
I'll be frank, you're definitely the best worker here by a large margin, but it's a little demoralizing for the rest of the guys if they can never win.
That's my thought exactly. Good bossing, boss! Norman opened his mouth to tell the boss that it was okay, but he was interrupted.
Please, Norman, I don't want any arguments.
Norman tried to tell him again that it was quite all right, and again the boss interjected with,
Listen, if you're going to play hardball, I'll just give you a raise equal to the bonus. It'll amount to the same thing anyway. At least like this, other people could be happy too.
Norman thanked the boss and went back to filing reports. Bro, that astrological zodiac prediction is still coming true. How did you do that, Norman? Oh, you twisted my arm. You talked me into it. He didn't say anything. I think the boss just has some deep-set guilt about the entire situation. Maybe he's just as anxious a human as Norman. I always do love to visit this subreddit. It makes me feel human, if only for a little while, and I hope it did the same for all of you as well. Norman gets upset during the election. Oh, that's pretty timely. Norman was hoping to catch some CSI reruns, but it appears that they had other programming scheduled. Stupid adult shows. What is this supposed to be, Future of the Nation? Don't care. Norman's a Chad. Norman reads a book. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Norman was relaxing on the couch, reading a novel. The book was an exciting narrative about a man who went on adventures across the world. Norman wondered what it would be like if someone wrote stories about him. Norman thought about how his days usually went. Well, that's just silly. What would they even write about? Norman put down his book. Suddenly, he didn't feel like reading anymore. Little does Norman know, but I hope he never finds the subreddit or the videos because he'd probably be exceedingly uncomfortable with all that. Norman enjoys a chocolate bar. It was 4 p.m. and Norman was shopping at a 7-Eleven. He saw there was a 2 for $3 sale on some chocolate bars near the cash register. He bought a Kit Kat and a Hershey bar. He got into his second-hand 2014 silver Toyota and ate the Kit Kat, one piece at a time. It was very crispy and sweet. He had enough chocolate for one sitting and put the Hershey into his pocket. Unfortunately, when he got home later that night, it melted. Well, you don't have much experience with chocolate there, do you, Norman? Here's a tip, stick it in the freezer, eat it later. I just saved you $1.50. Norman takes 10. Norman had just finished writing a hefty email, and as a treat to himself, he decided to lean back in his chair. He would have folded his arms behind his head, but he'd seen other guys do that in the office, and it looked a little self-indulgent. He admired his pristine desktop and wondered whether it could do with a spruce or a small fern. It was a little bare. Even the photo of Norman was a little bit old. It had been taken when Norman was a kitten, looking startled, his pupils as large as ink-filled satellite dishes. Life moves pretty fast, remembered Norman from the Ferris Bueller film that he had accidentally watched last night. If you don't look around sometime, you could miss it, he attempted. He would take an up-to-date photo of Norman that very evening. It seems like Norman learned a lot from Ferris Bueller. I think we all have. Norman feels blue. Norman was having a bad day. This morning, Norman, his cat, vomited on the couch. Normally this wouldn't bother him. He never found it as a chore to look after his best friend, but today, she vomited on top of the daily newspaper as well, leaving his morning empty and without a crossword. Just my luck, Norman muttered to himself. Later at work, things got even worse. Not only was it Monday, but Frank, Norman's coworker, beat him to the last creamer cup. Norman could have grabbed it first, but he let Frank step in front of him, just in case Norman grabbed something that Frank needed, like the creamer. Of course, Norman was happy for Frank to have the cream, but that left Norman's coffee bitter, which left Norman bitter. In the evening, huffed and puffed and all tuckered out, Norman went to his favorite restaurant, TGI Fridays. Why is that so in character? He placed an order for chicken wings. They were satisfactory for him, but not enough to sweeten his mood. "Hey, mister," said the red-haired waitress. "Just thought I'd ask you. We got an apple pie slice that someone didn't want with their order. Would you like to have it? It's on the house." Norman looked up at the waitress. She smiled warmly. The pie looked warm, too. Norman nodded. "Here you go, sweetie," she said. From the window outlooking from the kitchen, the red-haired waitress and one of her co-workers watched Norman inspect the pie. He spun the plate around, carefully analyzing the slice. He grabbed the fork, cut off a piece, and took a bite. A warm smile came onto his face.
"He looks happy now,"
said the co-worker. "If he's happy, I'm happy." I didn't even know that they allowed you to go to TGI Fridays on a Monday. But I'm glad that Norman did, and I'm glad these two noticed that he needed a little pick-me-up. Free pie works wonders. Norman does drugs. Oh, edgy. Norman was at the convenience store. He was particularly parched that morning and looked at his options. He reached for a caffeine-free Coke, Norman's favorite, but he paused. I have a long day ahead of me, thought Norman. I could use a pick-me-up. Norman grabbed a regular Coke instead.
"Oh yeah, buddy, kick the tires and light the fires, you know?
Gotta be careful with that stuff. Eventually Norman's gonna get into the 5-hour energies. We'll never be able to stop him. Norman games the system. A few days ago, Norman went to his fridge to pour a glass of milk. The carton was light. He thought, the milk is almost gone. He emptied the carton into a glass, but the glass was half empty. Gee, he thought, I really should go grocery shopping. Before disposing of the carton, he saw a coupon adhered to the side, 50 cents off, so he peeled it off. Norman wondered if anything else he needed had a coupon. It had been some time since he last grappled with any coupons. Today, for some odd reason, he felt that things would be different. With a dulled number 2 pencil in hand and the milk coupon in his pocket, Norman started a list. He opened up the weekly mailer to browse coupons on his favorite items. Cat food? Nah, no deals on cat food. Bread? No deals on bread. There was a deal on flavored potato chips. No thank you. And then he found a store coupon. Milk, 50 cents off. Norman pondered, could I possibly use both at the same time? Although the thought of it was thrilling, he decided to try it. He finished off the list and went to the store. Oh yeah, Norman, to pull off a big heist, you need to take a small hit. Norman entered the grocery store with butterflies in his stomach. Everything in his body was telling him to just forget it. Just buy the milk and don't make any waves. But Norman pressed on. Norman found the brand of milk right where it always was. However, to his surprise, it was on sale. 50 cents off. Oh, now his butterflies turned to bees. He was whelmed with emotions of uncertainty. I couldn't possibly ask the checkout clerk to sell me milk that's on sale for 50 cents off and ask for another 50 cents off with the manufacturer's coupon and ask for them to honor the store's coupon. That just feels flat out rude. But still, Norman pushed on. He finished shopping and went to the checkout. He placed the coupons on the belt at the end of his groceries. The checkout clerk rang up the milk. The screenshot showed milk, $3, sale, 50 cents, $2.50. Then at the end, the clerk rang in the coupons. Beep. The screen showed manufacturer's coupon, 50 cents. Beep. Store coupon, 50 cents. He paid for his groceries and left. As he exited the store, he thought, what we are never changes, but who we are never stops changing. And that is a CSI quote at the end of it, which is just the perfect cherry on the sundae, isn't it? Sometimes you cut me real deep, Norman. I'm glad we're learning and growing. Norman's cat-like reflexes. Norman was walking down the street one sunny afternoon, breaking in a new pair of loafers. Just as his left heel was about to hit the ground, he spotted a wad of gum directly below it. Without a thought, he quickly repositioned his foot in midair and stepped down on his toes instead of his heel, barely avoiding contact with the gum. He allowed himself a small smile of victory as he continued his stroll. If it didn't specify the loafers, I would think that this story was actually about Norman the cat. But hey, you know, look at that. Good for him. Old Norman still got it. Norman finally snaps. Oh no. He had been trying for hours, but he finally got the hang of it. Norman wore a satisfied smile, one of an accomplished man, for the remainder of the workday. He couldn't wait to show Norman. Oh, snaps his fingers. Yeah, they got me a little bit more than it should have. It's so succinct. 3 beautiful sentences. Well played, sir. Norman makes a choice. It's always difficult. Norman walked into the convenience store and he thought about the time that his coworker Lisa told a story about picking out a kitten. I picked the all-black one because it was the cutest, she had said. But I felt bad because the other kittens are probably sad that they didn't get picked too. Norman walked to the cash register and paid for his can of caffeine-free Diet Coke. He wondered if the other cans felt sad for not getting picked too. I mean, no, they're inanimate objects, but you could buy a case or two if you want. You just gotta watch out for the aspartame. And the comments kind of went off on aspartame too. There's a tiny sub-story down here. By Back Kidza, Norman drinks a soda. Norman popped open his can and started towards the door. As he moved to push it open, his eyes glanced over the ingredients list of that soda. Carbonated water, caramel color, aspartame, phosphoric... Wait, what was that one? Norman knew what carbonated water was. He knew the color of caramel. He didn't know what aspartame was. Norman wondered if he should be worried that there was this thing that he didn't know about in his drink. Then he took a sip and forgot all about it. Norman liked Diet Coke. Yeah, sort of fly by night. This is one of those things that doesn't really seem like it matters, but it might. Couple decades down the road. I'll say a prayer for you, Norman. This one's called Norman Tells a Lie. It's impossible. It was a regular lazy Sunday for Norman. Norman was asleep for once on his lap, and Norman was half watching daytime CSI reruns, half enjoying the moment, but only half. Then the doorbell rang, and Norman scrambled off his lap and under the couch. Silly Norman, Norman chuckled to himself, but Norman also thought to himself, who could that be? Maybe his son decided to pop in for a visit. Norman quickly shuffled to the door in a frenzy of excitement, but only to see a random charity door knocker. He opened the door, trying to hide his disappointment. When the lady inquired for money, Norman responded, sorry, I've already donated earlier today with my son, online. He taught me how to use the internet today. A smile came to the lady's face, and she told Norman with a smile to enjoy the rest of his day. Norman felt guilty over himself, but he didn't know which bit of his lie he felt more guilty about. The part about his son, or the part about knowing how to use the internet. But he didn't feel bad about denying money to charity. Alright, cool. I'm seeing what you're about, Norman. But seriously, I hope your son does come for a visit soon. You deserve it. Norman abuses drugs. Oh my god, dude. This is a slippery slope. What'd I tell you about that caffeine coke? He's gotten hooked into the cola. It ain't good for you, Norman. Let's see how it goes. Norman laid limp on his couch, rubbing his temples and clenching his eyelids. This headache had really been mildly inconveniencing him for almost 2 whole hours now, and he was really enjoying reading a tutorial on proper garden hedge clipping techniques, but even the lowest brightness setting on his Dell laptop aggravated the headache. You want to text-to-speech that stuff, maybe? Norman decided that he had had enough, and he needed to get off the couch and take action. A pack of aspirin lay on the counter in the kitchen, and Norman thought it best to read through the instructional leaflet. After all, someone had taken the time to write it. He proceeded to take 2 tablets, as recommended, followed by a slice of conservatively buttered wholemeal toast. That's good, not on an empty stomach. Half an hour passed, and Norman felt no effect from the aspirin. This slightly irked him, and in a moment of ruthless impulse, Norman knocked back a 3rd aspirin with a glass of water. An overwhelming feeling of instant regret rushed through him as a result of his horribly irresponsible actions, and Norman wondered whether he truly knew himself. Do any of us truly know ourselves? I don't want to say Norman's fallen off the deep end, but this is a slippery slope. We're seeing it happen in real time. Just be careful out there, little buddy. Norman's one night stand. Or maybe just one nightstand. Norman's nightstand was beginning to run out of space for his books about 20th century rail networks. Norman was considering buying a second. Putting up a bookshelf for them would require a day of DIY, and while he had no other plans this Saturday, he found the idea of doing DIY himself amusing, given how little he had ever actually produced with his hands. Never too late to change it, Norman. It's called do-it-yourself for a reason. You doing it. Norman decided that he would not be purchasing a second nightstand and felt a bit embarrassed just thinking about what someone might think if they saw he had 2. Then he realized with relief that the chance of anyone ever seeing how many nightstands he had was very low. Damn, kinda caught feels near the end there. Norman, you need to get out there and get yourself some good, you know? Norman's loneliness does cause relief in this scenario, but you can't be lonely forever. I think Norman needs to shoot his shot with Lisa, or learn to use the internet, like in this next story, where Norman looks for wild Asian ass. Norman was sat at his work desk, eating his plain cheddar cheese sandwich and doing the local paper's crossword puzzle. He was chuffed that he was doing so well. In fact, only one clue remained. Wild Asian ass. The clue read. He was really stumped, and he wanted to win because a completed crossword could be returned and entered into a drawing for a CSI box set. Suddenly, Norman had an idea. He could Google the clue to get the answer. He struggled with the morality of cheating before he decided to throw caution to the wind. W-I-L-D. Norman typed in the letters while frantically looking around the office lest he be caught cheating or doing something else. A-S-I... Wait! Onager! Norman remembered. The nature documentary with the narrator that had the soothing voice. He deleted his search and walked to the postbox after work with his head held high. He told Norman all about it when he got home. A few days later, after the competition had ended, Norman rushed to the door to check the post. And there it was, his entry, with a return to sender written on it. In his haste, Norman had forgotten the stamp. Well, you win some, you lose some there, don't you, Norman? I think in this story you dodged a bigger bullet than you realize. Norman is wished a Happy New Year. Norman packed up his suitcase and got up to leave the office for the day. As he passed Lisa on the way back out, Lisa smiled and said, "Happy New Year, Norman." Norman wished her a Happy New Year back, paused, and then said, "See you next year." As Norman walked out the door, he smiled. See, Norman got game. What a clever and amazing joke. Well, for Norman, at least. Norman has a date. Oh, he's getting into it. Look at him go. Norman was at the grocery store one evening after work at his usual time when he was startled to see a table set up near the lunch meats. There was not usually a table there, so Norman started to feel uncomfortable. However, the man behind the table was very friendly. He said hello to Norman and even called him sir. Norman was not used to being called sir, so he was very flattered. But he was not sure if he should call the man sir back, so he just nodded.
Would you like to try one of these?
Said the man, holding out a strange brown piece of food. Norman did not want to try the new food, but he didn't know what else to do, so he accepted it. It was very sticky.
It's a date,
the man said. Norman said thank you and walked away to nibble on the date. It was very strange and sweet, not like a biscuit at all. Norman put the date in the bakery trash can, well out of sight of the man at the table. Usually, he uses the deli trash can at the grocery store. What a strange evening it has been. Yeah, you got a date with a strange man. Nobody tell Norman that wasps have to die in order for dates to be created? Oh no, wait, that's figs. Never mind. You're good, Norman. Just enjoy your date with the nice man from the deli. Norman takes the day off. Oh, you're lucky. You're so lucky. At 7 a.m., the clock in Norman's room goes off. Norman's not too disturbed by this because he's been awake since 6:57 a.m. But as he lifts his head from the pillow, he feels something throbbing in his temple. His nose is also stuffy. Oh no, you caught it too, didn't you, Norman? There's been a cold going around the office. Better check my temperature. Norman lets out a small cough as he checks his thermometer. 99 degrees. Not good. He sits on the foot of his bed and thinks. He took a sick day 8 months ago. Would it look bad to take another one so soon? Then again, would his coworkers be annoyed by his periodic nose blowing? Norman decides that he should go in. You never know when you need that sick day for something serious. As Norman walks through his living room, he sees Norman sleeping on the ground. Norman looks up at him tiredly. Meow. A small pile of vomit is in the corner. Norman calls his boss and lets him know that he's not coming in today because Norman needs to go to the vet. Oh, I love that. He loves his little animal more than he loves himself. Oh, little feline creature, little do you know that you are my reason to live. Kind of weird and sad, but also kind of sweet. I don't really know how I feel. Norman makes spaghetti. Ooh, spaghetti. It was snowing, and Norman really wanted to make spaghetti. Just seconds after lighting his stove, under 2 ounces of generic store-brand noodles, he realized that he didn't have spaghetti sauce. Norman's heart sank. Not only would he not get spaghetti, the noodles would have to go to waste. As he was about to toss the spaghetti, a whim of a thought crossed his mind. He grabbed a can of diced tomatoes, some olive oil, basic kitchen spices. Well, it didn't taste like the spaghetti that he was used to, and in some ways it was even better. It looked like the fancy spaghetti that he sometimes sees in the magazines. Norman enjoyed the feeling of accomplishment and creativity, though he told himself that next time he would not forget to pick up spaghetti sauce. Look at Norman, expanding his horizons, doing something new. Even if you just did it the one time, at least now you know that you can do it, you know? I think that's the thing I like the most about Norman stories. How about this one? Norman checks his email. Norman logged on to his Yahoo email, only to be greeted by a very official-looking message. The terms and conditions have been revised and updated. Before continuing to use our website, please read them carefully and then select I agree at the bottom. Norman put on his reading glasses, settled into his seat, and began to read. Much time later, when Norman reached the end, he felt that the terms and conditions were very reasonable. Satisfied, he clicked, I agree. Norman smiled at Norman, who'd been curled up next to him. Well, Norman, today was certainly productive. Even if Norman did spot something untoward in the terms and conditions, I don't think that he would contact anyone about it. Maybe he would just click, I don't agree, and lose access to his Yahoo email. Is that all he does, is check his email? He doesn't know how to use the internet still? That's fine, Norman. Most of the internet's not worth using anyways. Except specifically the ReddX YouTube channel. Thanks so much for watching this far with me, friends. Maybe click subscribe if you haven't yet. Our next story is Norman makes a mistake. Norman was incredibly tired today. A man holding a clipboard said to Norman, "That's a real nice tie you're wearing." "You too," Norman replied while walking away, before realizing that the man wasn't wearing a tie. It's just the auto response. Like, sure, you feel embarrassed because you said it, but the other person understands. They've done that before too. It's all about that human connection. Norman buys gas. Norman got in his car to drive home from work. After putting on his seatbelt and turning the key in the ignition, he checked the gas level, as he always did. Norman noticed that the gas indicator showed slightly less than a third of a full tank. I should get gas on the way home, thought Norman. He considered what gas station he should visit, and looked across the street to check the price at the station there. The station there has gas for $2.06, but I believe I remember the station near my home has gas for $2.04. I'll stop there instead. Bro, these gas prices from a decade ago are blowing my mind right now. So Norman pulled out of the parking lot and began his commute home. This way the gas level will be lower when I fill it up and I'll get an even better deal, he thought. Norman smiled at his situation. When Norman got to the gas station near his home, he noticed that the price was $2.09 per gallon. Norman scolded himself for incorrectly remembering the price of gasoline at this station. Nonetheless, my car is low on gas. I'll just fill it up here, Norman thought. Again, sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. When I worked at a gas station, we would have to go out and change the prices in the middle of the day, so maybe Norman was correct about the $2.04. And next time he goes to the $2.06 gas station, it's going to be $2.11. Alright, that's a lot of numbers. I'm not making sense no more. Let's just do a couple more stories, then I'll get out of here for the day. God, I really love Norman. Norman answers the door. It was just after work, and Norman was assembling a meal in the kitchen. Just as he peeled back the plastic from his any-day roast, the doorbell rang. He quickly stirred his food before approaching the door and peeping through the peephole. "Hello?" he suggested. The man on the other side was smartly dressed and carrying a clipboard. Is that Mr. Norman?" "Speaking." Norman had joined Norman at the door. Norman lifted him up so that he could see through the peephole as well. That's adorable. We have a record that indicates that you recently signed up to our deluxe life insurance policy. I would like to talk to you about our super deluxe life insurance policy. Norman did not recall having signed up to a life insurance policy, and neither had Norman. "I'm afraid you might have the wrong Norman," Norman shouted politely through the keyhole. "May I come in for a moment?" asked Clipboard. "No, I don't think so," Norman replied. "This is an opportunity for you to leave a loved one assurance and comfort. You would want that, wouldn't you, Norman?" Norman looked down at Norman. "I think he's probably quite capable of looking after himself. I really must be getting on. I'm sorry. I hope you find another Norman." Norman felt very guilty as he silently watched Clipboard walk to the door opposite his and start feeling up his neighbor's mail. Yeah, don't feel sorry for that guy. Norman returned to his any-day roast, traded up, and visited his sofa. He looked at Norman, who was still sitting at the door. "You will be able to look after yourself, won't you?" Norman stretched and walked away. God, just a whole melange of emotions in this one. You find out the dude's a scammer, you're like, is Norman about to be axe murdered? And you feel real scared. But then Norman points out that the cat is really the only one that he has to look after anymore. And you feel real sad. What happened to Norman's son? This series of events should not have gone this way. But sometimes it is what it is. How about this one? Norman gets lit! I like that. Norman walked upstairs for the company party that was being held in the conference room. Normally, Norman did not go to these things, but he had a special blue tie that he was really wanting to show off to everyone. So after arriving in the conference room, he quickly moved over to the refreshments table and poured himself a glass of lemonade. Norman sipped on the lemonade He thought it tasted a little peculiar, but he didn't want to throw it away and appear rude. After finishing the glass, Norman found himself bobbing his head a little to the music that was playing, and he really enjoyed it. "Enjoying the lemonade, Norman?" Lisa asked. She must have noticed that Norman was acting a little out of character. For some reason, Norman was brutally honest about his feeling on the lemonade. It's okay. Not really my thing," Norman said at a slightly elevated tone over the music. "Yeah, I never really pegged you as a drinker," Lisa said, smiling. Norman gulped. He had drank alcohol, and now he was making a fool of himself in front of his coworkers. "I've got a bit of work to catch up on," Norman said, leaving the conference room to go down to his cubicle and work the guilt away. Dude, that's the worst thing ever. "I like your tie, by the way," Lisa called out. Norman smiled. "I do too," Norman said, smiling before leaving the party. "Well, I guess I'm happy if Norman's happy. I don't think you should be working in a cubicle off hours. I know they're not paying you for that. But somehow I'm sure Norman would tell me that hard work is its own reward." He's kind of like Hank Hill in a way. Maybe that's why I like him so much. Norman plays video games. After a long day at the office and a warm bowl of Quaker Oats, Norman boots up his IBM. Most days, Norman reads his emails and then goes to watch CSI, but today was different. Being adventurous, Norman loads up a video game. It was a game of kings and queens, of knights and guilds. Norman was instantly mesmerized by the vast variety and beauty of the game. Hours and hours of just clicking away. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9. After hours and hours of being completely immersed, Norman finally glances at the clock and did a double take in disbelief. 10 o'clock? 30 minutes past his bedtime? Shocked and dumbfounded, Norman quickly shuts down his laptop and goes to bed. Groggy and tired, Norman thinks to himself in his bed, maybe solitaire just isn't for me. Kings and queens, knights and guilds, got it? Super clever. I love all of the Norman stories, honestly. Norman questions his choice of milk. I mean, there's so many options. You got different animals and percentages, and then people started squeezing nuts and getting milk out of them.
That's why I love
These nuts.
Hey there, friends. Welcome back to ReddX, your source for the freshest daily cringe content anywhere on the internet. Promise. Swearsies, it's just a fact. It's totally science. Go ahead, look it up. Thanks so much. I've got wifey and baby sleeping in the room, so we're gonna do something a little more toned down today. And it's gonna be Life of Norman, as was requested in one of the live premiere chats. Can't remember who it was exactly. Can't say it rightly matters. I'm delivering the goods. So let's get into it. Norman feels included. Oh, best feeling in the world. There was a new coffee machine at work. It had been placed in the break room, right where the old coffee machine used to be. Someone had thought up a silly prank and had put up a sign next to the new coffee machine stating that it was voice activated and included a list of instructions. Norman did not realize that this was a prank. Like most mornings, Norman waited until the break room was empty before taking his morning break. Then, when he went to make a cup of coffee, he noticed the sign. What will they invent next? Thought Norman. Norman said politely, "I'll take a small decaf, please." Nothing happened. "I'll take a small decaf, please," repeated Norman. Still nothing. Unsure of what to do and not wanting to offend the machine, Norman returned to his desk without his usual coffee. That's not a fun prank.
No, thank you. Too late for me to drink coffee.
That's all it takes for Norman to give up? Come on. Where's your gumption? A short while later, Norman heard Charlene from HR's shrill voice loudly proclaim, "1 venti latte with soy milk." A few people chuckled. Norman joined in. It's nice to be included, thought Norman. It really was an exciting morning at the office. Yeah, but you didn't get your coffee. I guess it's decaf. He doesn't need the caffeine.
That's what all the Diet Cokes are for.
Next one. Norman gets a text message. It was 2:34 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Norman was fast asleep in his bed. Suddenly, he was awoken by a sharp ding sound that he didn't recognize. Startled, he sat up in bed and looked around the room. He noticed his cell phone glowing as it sat charging on his dresser. "We've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty." Confused and perturbed, Norman got out of bed and walked across the bedroom to check why his phone had made this noise. As he stumbled towards his phone, he considered using the outlet next to his bedside table in the future. When Norman got to his phone, he saw that he had a message notification. Norman was surprised because he never gets text messages. He tried to recall when he received his last text message, but he couldn't. You know, they have a history. You could check it. Never mind. He probably doesn't know how to check it. Who would possibly send me a text message in the middle of the night? Do they know that I have to wake up in 4 hours? Norman asked Norman, who sat squinty-eyed on his cat perch in the corner. Curiously and somewhat nervously, he opened the text message. "Amber Alert, plate HHG 5509, Pennsylvania, white Toyota Camry 4-door. Norman's heart sank, and he felt extreme guilt for questioning the urgency of this text message. Now Norman was wide awake, and he began considering his options. He tried to recall CSI episodes of kidnappings. After 5 minutes of consideration, Norman realized that he didn't have enough information to really do anything. He laid back in bed and repeated the license plate number in his head so that he could be on the lookout tomorrow. Yeah, totally, Norman. Let's hope the kid lasts till tomorrow, huh? Norman didn't get any more sleep that night. He got out of bed 4 hours later to get ready for work. On his way to work, Norman noticed 5 different white 4-door cars, but didn't believe any of them to be a Toyota Camry. Feeling somewhat disappointed in himself, Norman sat at his computer and opened its web browser, whose homepage was set to the local news station. He read the headline, "Missing Girl Found." Norman was very relieved, and he felt a huge weight off of his shoulders. He smiled and thought about how great this day had started out. What a burden for you to carry around, Norman. This shouldn't all be on your shoulders, man. Next time you get an Amber Alert, let me know. We'll go looking together, alright, bro? Let's get into the next story. Norman treats himself. Norman reached out, but hesitated. His hand hovered for a moment before retreating back into his pocket. He wasn't sure. He'd been saving his money lately and had been very responsible. He had saved $78 last month alone. Plus, he found that quarter on the ground yesterday, so why couldn't he splash out a little? He scrutinized his options and sighed. "Like, excuse me," said an annoyed voice from behind. "Sorry," said Norman as he stepped aside. In all his concentration, he didn't even notice the woman had approached and that he was now in her way. She passed and gave him a look. He stepped forward again and continued to weigh up his options. To hell with it, he thought. Norman reached out and gripped the more expensive 3-ply toilet tissue with conviction. Oh, that's so... you deserve it. He placed it in his shopping cart and moved forward with a stride in his step and a cheeky smirk. He barely even noticed the squeaky wheel on his cart anymore. Some things are priceless, Norman. I'm sure you know that already. But if you don't already, I'll reiterate, the good toilet tissue's worth buying. Priceless. Norman stops at a red light. On his way home from work one afternoon, Norman found himself pulling up to a stoplight at an intersection. He wasn't really late for anything in particular, so he didn't mind the delay. He glanced in his rearview mirror to see another car approaching, and it settled into the lane next to him to turn right. Norman appreciated music and liked to have the radio on while he was driving. When the car pulled up next to him, he turned the radio down so as to not be a bother. Both cars' windows were rolled up. But you can't be too careful, thought Norman. The light turned green, and Norman continued home. Was Norman listening to some gangster rap? Is that the real reason they turned it down?
Got my pistol point cocked, ready to link shots non-stop until I see your monkey ass drop.
You were scared to be a judge for your music, weren't you? I remember one time I was sitting at this red light and I was playing Fear. New York's all right if you like saxophones, and they're in like this dissonant saxophone solo, and this car rolls up next to me and I'm just bumping it, and I looked over and smiled. And now you all know that I've been a weirdo way before this YouTube thing. But Norman, he's one of the good ones. He's a good egg. Maybe the best of all the eggs. Anyway, next one. Norman tries a new brand. Norman was in the supermarket one Sunday morning. After placing a package of paper towels into his cart, he pulled his shopping list from his shirt pocket. As he ran a line through pea towels, Norman noticed that he had forgotten to find oatmeal. Lucky I remembered, he thought. Breakfast tomorrow would have been an adventure. Norman pushed his cart over to where the oatmeal could usually be found, but the shelf for the unsweetened original flavor was empty. Ugh. Norman looked at the shelves above and below. Fruit medley and cinnamon sugar. Fruit was too tart for Norman in the morning, so on a whim, he picked up a box of cinnamon sugar and proceeded through the checkout line. You're not a diabetic, are you, Norman? The next morning, Norman was excited to try his new oatmeal. He woke up 10 minutes early and went straight to the kitchen. Norman emptied the packet into his bowl, added exactly 1 cup of milk, and heated the mixture in the microwave for 3 minutes. After letting it cool, he tried a spoonful. Oh, that is much better than the kind I've been eating, thought Norman. I'll certainly get this from now on. Sometimes trying new things can be good. Norman knew that he was going to have a pleasant Monday. I don't know if this is canon Norman. I've not known Norman to like new things, but I mean, what kind of hairless ape are we if we're not eating sugar, right? Brain need to function. So yeah, while I'm skeptical that he actually liked it, that he stayed on the path and didn't buy the original as soon as he saw it at the store again, I am glad that Norman was able to enjoy something. Norman goes to the store to buy milk. Yeah, probably for the oatmeal. It was a beautiful morning outside. Norman had just woken up and went to make his morning cup of coffee. However, when he opened his fridge, he noticed that there was no milk left. Norman went outside to his car, got in, and drove to the supermarket. At the supermarket, Norman went to the milk aisle. He opened the refrigerator door, took out a carton of milk, and closed the door. He then went to the cashier to pay for this milk. Norman then went out to his car to drive back home. He made his coffee. The end. The message of this story? If you're ever making coffee and realize you don't have milk, driving to the supermarket is a good idea. I hate this stuff. Part of me gets what you're going at and sort of wants to love it for that, but overall, I think this is my least favorite Norman story ever. So congratulations, user Ariel MJD. Give me some spice. Give me some twists and turns. We'll see what happens in the next one. At least they're mercifully short, you know? Norman lifts something heavy. Oh yeah, bro, Gaines. Beefcake.
Follow your dreams. You can reach your goals. I'm living proof. Beefcake. Beefcake!
Norman was taking his 5-minute break at the water cooler again, hoping to strike up a conversation, when Lisa spotted him and called him over. I need to move this on top of my cabinet, she said, indicating a box on her desk. I can help with that, said Norman confidently. He was, after all, 2 whole inches taller than Lisa. He took a moment to unbutton his cuffs and neatly roll up his sleeves, and then he gripped the box handles. Careful, it's a bit heavy, said Lisa. I'll lift with my legs, Norman assured her, recalling the horror stories in a recent employee safety video. No, but for real, that stuff ain't no joke. Once your back is fucked, it's fucked. Norman bent at the knees and lifted. The box was indeed heavy, but not unmanageable. With a quiet grunt, he lifted it over his head and pushed it on top of the cabinet. Then Norman dusted his hands and turned to find that Lisa had been sitting on the edge of her desk, watching him keenly. Oh, Lisa and this will they, won't they? They will. They're going to. They have to, but Lisa has to make the first move. That's what I know. What is it? Norman asked. Oh, nothing, Lisa said, almost as breathless as he was. If there had been a body on the table, the moment would have reminded Norman of a romantic scene he'd recently been watching on CSI. Is there anything else I could help you with? He asked, his heart racing, as he worried that he was employing an unacceptable level of double entendre for the office. Is there anything I can help you with is like the lowest level of entendre. No, Lisa said with a slight smile. That was all I wanted. The excitement now over, Norman tipped an invisible hat. Don't do that. And left to return to his desk. He decided he would try for a conversation at the water cooler again tomorrow, and penciled it into his calendar. Oh god, that last part breaks my heart. Somebody go talk to him at the water cooler. Although he takes his lunch and avoids everybody else, so it's like, sort of no wonder nobody wants to talk with you even for the 5 minutes. It's called networking, Norman. You and I both, we need to work on that. We need to get there. It opens a lot of doors. Anyway, next one. Norman clicks his pen. Norman sat in traffic during his commute, listening to the radio, when a particularly catchy song started to play on said radio. Norman did not typically enjoy hip-hop, but this one was so gosh darn good. He could not help but bop his head to the beat. The commute seemed a little less dull now. Hours later, Norman sat at his cubicle, enjoying his 10-minute break. Norman held a pen idly in his hand, and he started to click the pen to the beat of the song. He smiled briefly, but then quickly stopped. I don't want to be a bother to anyone else, Norman said quietly to himself. Come on, enjoy yourself. Although enjoying oneself is what has gotten the world in the state that it's in, maybe we all need to have reservations and self-control like Norman. Maybe then we could return to a high-trust society. But that's a video for another day. We're moving on. Norman's best day ever. Ever? As Norman got to the front of the line, the cashier began to scan his groceries. Boop, boop, boop. The third beep had sent shockwaves down Norman's spine. He could not believe what he had just witnessed. No, this can't be, he thought to himself. This must be a mistake. However, Norman was not mistaken. What his eyes had witnessed was in fact the truth. The price of pickles had gone down by 15 cents. A momentous day indeed for Norman. One that he would certainly never forget. Oh, especially if it's those spicy pickles. My God, I want a pickle right now. Philippines always does these sweet pickles. I don't understand. But I do take a lot of solace in the fact that Norman probably eats the good pickles too. It's an important part of life and living. Pickles. Next one. 7 seconds left until the end of the fourth quarter. 6, 5. It's a 2-point game. 4, 3. It's Norman for the lead. 1. Norman threw it like his life depended on it. Alas, he missed the wide-open washing machine, and his dirty, rolled-up-in-a-ball socks fell a few inches short. Maybe next time, Norman murmured to himself sadly, picking up the dirty socks from the floor and gently placing them inside. Yeah, a little more practice. Also, don't ball your socks up like that because they're never going to get clean. I think that's pretty basic. Norman is way too fastidious to allow this. I feel like in my version of this story, he sinks the rolled up sock ball and then walks over to the washing machine and unrolls it. And then, yeah, he mutters something about how the socks will never get clean that way. Bing, bang, boom. I do like your take too, though, OP. Thanks for taking part in this story-building activity with us today. And you too, friends. If you haven't subscribed on the video yet, maybe you could, because maybe you're sticking around, and maybe you seem to enjoy some stuff we're doing here. Although Norman really is like quite a step apart from the usual stuff that we do. But that's why I like it. Little break. Norman gets a compliment. Norman sat immersed in a pile of paperwork. File after file beckoned to be checked and completed, so he worked on and on. His concentration broke when he heard a tap on the door. He looked up to see Lisa. Oh, how her sunny smile and glowing grace lit up the bleak walls of his cubicle. They exchanged hellos and discussed some work-related issue. While Norman explained some office technicalities to Lisa, her eyes wandered off to a small framed photo on Norman's desk. It was a photo of Norman holding Norman. Lisa exclaimed, "Oh, what a cute little kitty!" Norman smiled. "Yeah, that's Norman, and he happens to be my best buddy." Lisa said bye and left Norman to his paperwork and thoughts. When I get home today, I'll pass on Lisa's compliment to Norman. He'll be happy. I don't know if cats get all that worked up about compliments. He'd be like, she said you were a cute little kitty, and Cat's sitting there like, yeah, fuck, I know. Well, and what?
I don't know if I can stand the excitement.
Kinda gotta love cats for their attitude. Maybe Norman could take a page out of Norman's book, you know? Let us get into the next story. Norman gets tempted at work. Probably by Lisa, that temptress. Mondays at work are usually mundane for many people. However, for Norman, it's refreshing to get back into a routine after having 2 days away from the office. After lunch break, Norman notices his colleagues spinning on their chairs, laughing and having fun. He notices one guy almost fall off as the other colleagues spun him around. One of Norman's colleagues asked Norman to join in and have a chair race. He toyed with the idea of joining in for a second, then quickly came to his senses and thought, this is not safe for work. He politely declined and continued with his day. Hey Norman, do you want to come over here and break free from the monotony of your everyday life? Nah, I think I'm good. I'm just gonna go back to my desk and work. What is it like to be Norman? There are some things I love and some things that terrify me, like that. That interaction is terrifying to me. They probably only invited him because they think one day he's going to come with a Kalashnikov to work. But anywho, Norman treats himself. Again, dude? That's where the diabetes is coming from, I'm going to tell you right now. Norman was having a bad day. His bus passed him by, so he was late to work. The coffee machine at the office wouldn't work, and he felt too embarrassed to ask anyone else for help in fixing it. What if it was something simple, and he ended up looking foolish? In the afternoon, Norman decided that he would treat himself to a nice dinner. After all, it was a Friday, and was there any better way to perk up his day? He decided to go to his local pizzeria at exactly 6:08. Wouldn't want to be early and look like an old man or something like that. And Norman didn't want to be too late and be stuck in the rush with nothing to do as he waited for his food. I mean, to be fair, 6 p.m. is about right. He was so excited at the thought of this new development that he even let it slip to Lisa when she asked if he had any weekend plans. On his way out the door, 6:03, Norman thought of what he would order. He figured he would get his usual cheese pizza, but as he got closer, he thought, I am treating myself. Maybe I'll throw caution to the wind. I'll even be a little bit cheeky and tell the waiter to surprise me. Do waiters enjoy that? Do customers actually do that? I would think Norman would be way too neurotic to actually do that. Norman got to the restaurant, and through the glass he could see his son sitting there at a table for two. Norman couldn't believe his eyes. His son hadn't even told him that he was in town. A surprise. Maybe he called the office and Lisa had told him where Norman would be tonight. Normally, Norman didn't much like surprises, but the sight of his son soon eradicated any sense of anxiety he felt. As Norman was about to open the door and go greet his son, a young, pretty brunette girl sat down in the open spot. Norman didn't want to be a bother, so he went home and ordered the cheese pizza to be delivered instead. He would be adventurous on another night. Damn, this one cuts me. Well, why would you name it Treats Himself? This is heartbreaking. Poor Norman. Norman's son has got to be the hardest part of reading these stories. Every time he's mentioned, I just get cut so deep. And this one blindsided me because I thought it was going to end nice. Damn it.
You got me now. You got me now.
Oh well, we'll try again in the next one. Here we go. Norman makes a typo. Yes, I also make typos. One fine Sunday, Lisa, Norman's coworker, organized a Christmas party at the office. At the 11th hour, however, Lisa realized that there weren't enough chocolates for the whole crew. Reliable that Norman is, Lisa decided to text him, asking if he had any at his place. "I'll go check my panty," Norman texted back, followed by a 300-word text explaining the mistake. Yeah, it's like when you ask the wife if she wants you to pick up any barbecue chicken, and you text her barbecue children. Well, Norman got through the party, avoiding eye contact with Lisa through the entire blasted ordeal. Just as he was about to leave, Lisa stopped him in his tracks. "Thank you so much, Norman," she said, hugging him. "You're a savior." "Oh, it was really nothing," Norman replied politely, and walked away with a smile on his face all the way home. Yeah, she knew what he meant. He meant to say pantry. What I think is weird is that his predictive text has decided that panty is something that Norman types often enough for his predictive text to be like, yeah, you meant this instead of party, right? Or pantry. I guess I don't type pantry that often either. Whatever. Glad you had a good Christmas, Norman. And I'm glad Lisa could just let that one go. There's no need to make it more awkward. Anyway, let's see where else we're headed. Norman thinks of her at 3:24 a.m. It's going to be another sad one, isn't it? You're going to rip my heart out, ain't you? Norman wakes suddenly, breath sharply filling his lungs. He glances at the clock. 3:24 a.m. He rearranges his body into a comfortable position and snuggles tightly into the blankets. He begins to recall bits of his dreams. It was of her again. He knows allowing himself to indulge in thoughts of her and their life together ultimately makes everything else unbearable, but Norman is weak. Norman closes his eyes and lets his mind drift to her. Shared laughter, moments of joy, moments of struggle. Norman sifts through it all, happily and sorrowfully. Norman winces as a wave of pure desire and longing surge through his body. Norman grabs his headphones and finds that song he loves, the one that she showed him. It reminds him of her presence. He listens over and over again. In his mind, he's embracing her. Norman drifts back to sleep. I don't know how this one's that far down the list. This is outstanding. A little bit sad, you know, but very human. And I think that's the thing that we all like most about Norman. Although you want a quick and easy fix, just print her face on a pillow. Seems to work for waifus. See that? See how I just take that heartfelt moment and crap all over it? Nice. And we're moving on. Norman sneezes. As Norman rode the tram, a young and pretty woman sat across from him. Why don't I have the courage to talk to her? Norman asked himself. He wished he didn't ask that question because a lot of reasons came to mind. Norman sneezed. Part of him wished that the sneeze would get her attention, but unfortunately, nothing came of it. A minute later, the young woman sneezed. Bless you, a younger, more handsome man said to her. Why didn't I get a bless you? Because you're a dude, Norman. Norman felt offended. However, it might have just been a misunderstanding. Perhaps the young man missed Norman's sneeze and forgot to bless him too. Norman decided to test that by giving a louder, more obvious sneeze. The young man turned to Norman, and Norman's heart started to race. You should cover your mouth when you sneeze, he said to Norman. Norman nodded and agreed. Truth is, he was terribly embarrassed. What would the pretty woman think now? Yeah, I don't think that really gets to be any of your concern, Norman. Somebody else is moving in. It's all over but the crying. A moment later, the young man sneezed. Norman enacted his revenge by saying nothing. He felt petty and accomplished. Let's see how this young man likes it, going about unblessed. Bless you, the pretty woman said. Norman sulked. Damn. It truly is a hard knock life, isn't it? Some people get all the luck, but notice how Norman's not ranting about Chad's and Stacy's, even still. Next one. Norman questions his choice of milk. I mean, there's so many options. You got different animals and percentages, and then people started squeezing nuts and getting milk out of them.
That's why I love
These nuts.
I stay away from the nut milk, personally. All right. 2% or 3? Norman pondered the question, a carton of milk in each hand. The percentage points were for fat. Norman adored the taste of 3%. It reminded him of his youth, when he didn't have to count calories or consider carbs. To be young again. To taste 3%. But Norman had put on weight these past few weeks. Dare he risk his waistline further? What would his neighbors think should they see him coming home with new, larger pants? I think the main concern is, why do the neighbors know the size of my pants? Looking good, Norman, remarked Bess, the gray-haired and elderly lady who lived across the street. Norman glanced over and waved. It looks like he wasn't the only one who did his groceries at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. 3% it is, thought Norman with a smile. Yeah, Bess ain't here to judge you. Her name's Bess, for God's sake. That's not a name for a person, that's a name for a cow. But Norman don't judge nobody. I think that's beautiful. I'm starting to crack myself up. Still gotta get a few more in there. Let's move along. Norman meets the new guy at the office. His name is Party Demon. Whoa! Today was quite an exciting day for Norman. It was the first day for the new employee, Robert. Norman thoroughly enjoyed having somebody new join the company. It made him feel as if he were in the right place to be. Kind of strange. Yeah, we hired somebody. That means it's meant for me. I'm pretty sure every company hires people. Weirdest flex, but okay. Norman had been with the company for quite some time, therefore he was familiar with the addition of new personnel. Generally, Norman would greet his new peers with a handshake, his name, and some weather talk. Norman read in a book that people liked other people that were funny. Well, Norman wasn't typically the funny type, but he wanted to make friends other than Norman, so all morning he pondered a joke. And when finding one, he locked it in his mind so as not to forget. I'd love to hear a Norman joke. I bet he fucking kills and just has no idea how. As Norman arrived at his desk, he placed his briefcase bottom down and sat in his chair. He saw a crowd corralled around Robert's desk, laughing and making conversation. After 23 minutes, the crowd dispersed and Norman made his way. With butterflies in his stomach and a smirk on his face, Norman walked up to Robert's desk and said, "It's a nice day outside, isn't it?" Norman knew fully well that the weather outside was gloomy and not nice at all. Robert kept at his computer, not hearing or noticing Norman directly to his left. Norman waited for a response and gradually realized that Robert had not heard him. Norman's smile faded as his eyes drew to the ground and he receded back to his desk. Yeah, dude, your window was in like the 23 minutes where everybody was crowded over there. Now he's shifted back into work mode. I wouldn't feel too bad about it. There's always tomorrow. Who really wants to get to know their coworkers anyways? Next story. Oh, this is a Robert story. Robert makes a new friend. There was a new employee at Norman's office named Robert, and Norman was determined to befriend him. He remembered his first days at the office and how he had felt isolated from his coworkers, and he didn't want Robert to go through that same experience. Though disheartened that his first attempt at contact hadn't been successful, Norman decided that he would try again before he left for the day. At precisely 5 o'clock, Norman closed down all of his projects to save for the day. He decided to take the long way around the office to the parking garage so that he could stop by Robert's cubicle and say hello on his way out. As he rounded the corner of the building, he saw Lisa standing in the entrance to Robert's cubicle. "Aw, say it ain't so, Lisa, you whore!" She was casually leaning against the wall and playing with a strand of her hair. Robert laughed heartily at something she had said. Norman turned around and decided to take the other path. He didn't want to disturb them. Norman felt a funny feeling in his stomach that he couldn't quite identify. Maybe he had eaten something that didn't agree with him. He reached the parking garage and climbed into his Geo Metro. He does drive a Geo Metro, doesn't he? Has it been mentioned before? Did it tickle me that much the first time? Norman started driving home in silence, and indeed, the weather seemed much gloomier now. I can't quite place my finger on Robert, like, it's all painted through Norman's frame of reference, so a big part of me wants to hate him, but what has he really done wrong? Got to know some people at the office. Lisa started flirting. Lisa flirts with everybody, okay? If she was a man, HR would have a field day. I guess we'll see how the Robert thing develops a bit later on, but for now, something unrelated. Norman has a visitor. Is it his son? Please God, say it's his son. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and Norman was sitting in his recliner watching TV with Norman when he heard the doorbell ring. He got up and went to the door. When he opened it, Norman was surprised to see a handful of neighborhood kids on his stoop. They were all wearing dirty baseball caps and had baseball gloves. "Hey, mister, we're real sorry, but our baseball landed in your backyard. You think we could have it back?" Norman appreciated the young man's politeness. "Sure, let's go around the back." Norman stepped outside, closed the front door, and led the group of kids around to his backyard. When they got there, they began looking around for the baseball. They shortly found it inside Norman's bird bath, floating in the water. "Oh man, it's all waterlogged!" exclaimed one of the kids. "Well, thanks anyway, mister." "Can you not use a baseball if it gets wet?" "I think it's fine. Go fucking knock it around until it dries out." These kids are snooty. Norman felt bad for the children, however. He suddenly remembered something. "Hey, wait here for a minute, kids," he told them as he made his way back into his house. He headed for the storage area in his basement. Norman was a very organized man, and he knew exactly where to find what it was he was looking for. He pulled out an old cardboard box, and there it was, the baseball that he and Norman Jr. used to play catch with when Norman Jr. was much younger. It was a little dirty and smudged, but still in great shape. Norman went back outside and gave the baseball to the youngsters. "Here you go, kids. Have fun." "Wow, gee, thanks, mister," the kids exclaimed as they ran away. In that moment, the kids reminded Norman of Norman Jr. Norman watched them go with half a smile on his face. Yeah, some real mixed emotions there, but hey, at least you're letting go of things that don't truly matter. There's some memories contained in that, yes, but the memories are also up in your brain, so don't worry about it too much. You're getting attached to stuff. The more of it you let go, the happier you'll be. But as usual, I don't think Norman would ever go the full 9. It's too much change. Change does not spark joy. Next post. Norman's heist. Ooh, sounds high stakes. Norman sat at his desk, quietly eating his turkey sandwich. He was still on break for another 5 minutes, but he would probably just donate the last 2 to the company. All of a sudden, Norman's phone rang. Norman hastily swallowed his last bite and picked up the phone. "Hello?" Norman asked. "Hi, Norman. This is Sarah from HR. I have a form I need you to sign real quick, so can you head over to my office?" Sarah said. "Sure the dial tone interrupted Norman.
Ooh, Sarah. She's a real piece of work, you know.
First time I've ever heard of this character. Norman got up from his cubicle and walked next door to Sarah's office. Sarah was on her cell phone when Norman entered. She pointed at the form on her desk, then turned around to talk while looking out the window. Norman went over to the desk. He reached into his pocket for a pen, but unfortunately didn't find one. Rather than go back to his desk, Norman just used a pen that was next to the form. The way the pen glided when he wrote on the form impressed Norman. This was an extremely efficient pen. He noticed that Sarah had a dozen more in the cup on her desk. He considered asking Sarah about where she got the pen, but he didn't want to interrupt her phone conversation. Norman then considered the worst. When he got home, Norman guiltily confessed to Norman about his thoughts about that pen and vowed that he would never consider doing anything so sinister ever again. Oh, Norman, you really are just too pure for this world. I would have been like, I don't know, she deserves it. She deserves it, and also I want this pen, so I'm taking it. I think most people would go along with those thoughts, but not Norman, man. He's a different breed. Next post. Norman treats himself. My God, so many treats. We're gonna have to take your foot, Norman. The diabetes, it's too much. Whilst returning to the office, Norman decided to treat himself. He seems to do that an awful lot lately. He's sort of seeming self-indulgent, if you want me to be real honest. Maybe he's really going through something. Perhaps he would have a candy bar or a bar of chocolate. He hadn't had a Twix in a long time. Do they still even sell those? He wondered to himself. Who's out here eating Twix for real? You need to bite into a nice Charleston Chew. Now that's a real candy. You whippersnappers. Back in my day, we didn't have all these fancy schmancy candy bars with their caramels and their nougats and whatnot. No, sir. We had a delicious Charleston Chew, and it was the bee's knees. Excuse me, Grandpa ReddX, isn't Charleston Chew mostly nougat? You shut your whore mouth! Delicious chocolate mixed with creamy, luscious vanilla or chocolate nougat. Oh, it's a match made in heaven. Snickers and Twix are both bullshit. Stuffing your candy bar with peanuts and cookies. It's just plain dishonest is what it is. No, sir. Charleston Chew doesn't need any gimmicks to be the best. And without a doubt, it's the most versatile candy bar on the market. You can freeze it and shatter it or microwave it to strangle your ex-wife. You can do all sorts of things. It's like the Swiss Army knife of candy bars. You kids, you just don't know. If any food has more than 2 ingredients, then it's unpure. Chocolate and nougat. That's all you need. Okay, Grandpa, lay down. It's nap time. But yes, as Norman found out, they did still sell Twix. And upon completion of his purchase, Norman continued walking back to the office. He had originally intended to wait until he was back at his desk before enjoying his treat, but Norman was overwhelmed with the anticipation of his 2 fingers of chocolate-covered biscuits and caramel. With reckless abandon, he tore at the packaging, only to watch helplessly as the left finger fell onto the dusty ground. Oh well, still got half a Twix, exclaimed Norman in an effort to reassure himself. Norman, 5-second rule, Norman! It's too late. He didn't do it. But yeah, with the diabetes and all, probably half a Twix is all you should have. It might not seem like it's for the best right now, but trust me, it's for the best. Next story! Norman waits for the bus. Norman sat at the bus stop, wondering where the bus was. It was supposed to arrive at 8:05. It was 8:02. This made Norman anxious. A car pulled up to the stop and rolled down its window. A young man inside smiled and waved hello. Oh God, it's Elliot Rodger. Run, Norman, he's gonna throw coffee on you. You should check out that manifesto on the channel if you haven't yet. It's such a vibe shift. Norman smiled back and began to say hello to the man. A man next to him walked to the car to greet his friend. They both looked at Norman disapprovingly. Norman started taking a different bus to work. Man, fuck both of them. Like I'm the weirdo for wanting to make a human connection. I was trying to be courteous, you douche. Try it out. But that's way too confrontational for Norman. Never gonna happen. Oh well, I hope the new bus treats you better, buddy. Next post. Norman dips into his rainy day fund. Do it, Norman. Squander it. Squander it all! Norman had just finished washing the last dish when his landline started to ring. He was pleased at how polite the caller was to be calling at such a reasonable hour. He dried his hands quickly and picked up the receiver. The considerate caller turned out to be Norman Jr. He was receiving an award at university and was wondering if Norman could perhaps be able to make it to the ceremony in only a fortnight's time. Norman said he wouldn't miss it for the world. He would use his rainy day fund. He would take time off work. He would think about that phone call often as he counted down the days. When travel day finally came, Norman was apprehensive as he buckled himself into his airplane seat. He was feeling a number of emotions, but as the plane took off, more than anything else, he was feeling hopeful. Maybe this would be the fresh start that he and his son needed to find their way back into each other's lives. Yeah, maybe. Hope floats. I mean, the end of college is basically the beginning of adult life, and that's the point where you have to start paying for all your own crap, and you realize, like, wow, my parents did all this for me? Maybe I should give them a call sometime. Let them know that I love them and appreciate it. It was easier back then, sure. But easier is still pretty goddamn hard, as far as I could tell. Anyway, a couple more stories. Norman wins $1 million. Oh my god, it's really happening for us. Yeah, sorta, whatever. It was 11:52 a.m., and Norman was just working through another humdrum day at the office. As he was assembling some more spreadsheets, Norman received an email notification. You've just won $1 million. Click here to claim your prize. Norman hesitantly clicked to open the email. Oh no, don't do it.
Yeah, that sounds like a scam.
He wanted to relish in the moment, for this much adrenaline was rare for him to experience. Wearing a prim smile, Norman finally read the email. Hello, sir. Please give credit card information to hotwire money to bank. Now, Norman wasn't too computer fancy, but he intuitively knew that this was too good to be true. He dismissed the email and returned to work. Now that's good OPSEC. A looming tinge of morosity hit Norman after such an emotional ordeal, and he had to fill this void by looking forward to something else. Perhaps I'll get Norman a special treat on my way home today, Norman contentedly thought to himself. This was good enough. Norman resumed his humdrum day at the office. You know what they say, man? More money, more problems. You don't need none of that, Norman. Make enough to skate through life, and that should be just fine. Next one. Norman gets Instagram. Norman had heard about Instagram quite a few times around the office, but it never really interested him all that much. He always preferred his photos in a physical form, stored in a shoebox in the closet. One day, however, he overheard the new girl at work, Jessica, as she was talking about how all the kids these days are on the Instagram and that it's quote-unquote really fun. Yes, if you enjoy doom scrolling to increase your depression, why not?
I deliberately entered a thread full of things that I do not like.
Norman decided that he should try to get more in touch with his youth and made a note in his calendar to create an Instagram account on Sunday after lunch. When Sunday came around, Norman downloaded Instagram on his phone and created himself an account. He decided that he should also post a photo of himself as a way to celebrate his newfound hobby. Hobby? Oh god, let's hope it doesn't become that. I'm about to lose a ton of respect for you, Norman. Norman pulled out his finest suit, shaved his face, brushed his hair, and proceeded to take one of those selfies he had heard so much about. He posted it on his page and captioned it, "This is my first photo on Instagram, hopefully more will follow." He then closed the app and felt that a well-deserved nap was in order after all that effort. Norman cuddled up next to Norman in bed and they both hit the hay. A few hours later, Norman's alarm rang, waking him up from his slumber. He got up and reached for his phone to see if there was any activity on his Instagram. To his surprise, he had one alert. He eagerly pressed his notifications button and it read, "Welcome to Instagram. Find friends to follow by adding your phone number." Norman decided that this level of fame was far too much for him, and he proceeded to delete Instagram. That's the happiest ending I can imagine, honestly. Huge bullet dodge just now. Seems like we always make good decisions after a slumber, and I'm about due for one right now, friends, so thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Like, comment, sub if you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much to my Patreon patrons, my YouTube channel members. You guys, for real, I can't do it without you. If you can sign up, I appreciate it. If not, don't sweat it. I just want you to remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you definitely deserve it, and I shall see you in the next one. So until then, bye-bye.
Thank you for calling ReddX Industries. Your call is very important to us. Please hold on the line while we decontaminate the lab.